are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the IBPF webinar. We are very pleased to have Randi Silverman with us today, and she will be discussing issues around parenting a young child with bipolar disorder, which she has experienced firsthand. Randi is a member of the IBPF board, the associate producer of the short film Illness, and a producer and co-screenwriter of the film No Letting Go. She has led numerous community-based awareness campaigns and support groups related to child and adolescent mental health. Again, we are so pleased to have the opportunity to have you with us, Randi. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. So I guess I just get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is actually my very first webinar. I'm used to doing quite a bit of public speaking, but usually I have an audience. So I'm going to do my best to visualize all of you just sitting right in front of me and hope that goes well. Let's see. Oops, there we go. So I want to tell you first a little bit about myself and my personal story, and to give you an idea of why I talk and have become a mental health activist, and what led me to create a film about my story and to speak out. And obviously, based on the title, it's clear that I was a parent of a young child who had bipolar disorder. But when it really hit me that it was actually possible to change the way our culture views issues around mental health or mental illness or brain disease, I remember the very exact moment. I was laying in bed and there were these beautiful, beautiful orchids in the window on a table, and the sun was streaming through, making them look just like angels. And I was propped up in bed on a pillow because it was the 5th day of recovery after my mastectomy from my diagnosis of breast cancer. And there I was looking at these beautiful flowers, and there were flowers all over the room. And I was writing thank you notes to all of my friends and neighbors who had sent me beautiful flowers and food and casseroles and balloons. We lived at the time in a beautiful Upper Westchester County town in New York. And when a friend or neighbor experienced a serious illness or a death or some kind of difficulty, the community would band together. And I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. They organized meals, they helped with carpools, they went grocery shopping. And I had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was facing 6 to 9 months of chemotherapy. And the community was ready to help. And I should have felt lucky. But the truth is, as I was sitting in bed writing those thank you notes, I felt bitter, resentful, and angry. And you might think, well, that's a normal reaction for someone who was in cancer treatment, and perhaps it is. But I wasn't angry about the cancer. Whatever pain I felt from the mastectomy paled in comparison to the pain I felt a mere 2 years earlier when my middle son was seriously ill. So here's my little personal story. That's me and my husband, and we had 3 beautiful boys, and then I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2010. And I received tons of flowers, excuse my fun little animations, casseroles, carpools, and there I was writing the thank you notes. This is a picture of my middle son when he was younger. He was the life of the party. He was funny, outgoing, adventurous, adorable, and had more friends than he could keep up with. But sometime in the 1st grade, at the age of 6, he began to complain about hating school. He would beg me to, not school, he would beg me to the bus. He would beg me to drive him to school because he hated the bus. Now, I had 3 boys in 3 different schools, so that wasn't an easy task. But the more I tried to get him to go on the bus, the more he would complain and he would cry. He said the kids were mean. And if I asked him did something happen on the bus, he'd say, no, I just hate it. So every morning, day after day, we would negotiate while I was trying to get my 3 young children ready for school. Could I drive him? Could I pick him up? He was a master negotiator, even at 6 years old. And there were days when he would happily hop on the bus. He'd be excited to see his friends. But then there were other days where he literally just couldn't get onto the bus. He decided I needed to then pick him up every day. It wasn't just the bus going to school, it was the bus coming home. Mommy, what'll happen if you're not there? You know, what happens if you forget to pick me up? I've never forgotten to pick my children up. But every morning, week after week, month after month, our mornings became clouded by his terror of the bus, that something bad was going to happen and that I wouldn't be there. I reassured him. Every morning I would sit down and calmly walk him through the safety plan. He would never be left alone. The school had all of our phone numbers. The principal would stay with him. So there we are, trying to, this is me showing that my middle son started spiraling out of control. Hating the bus, he was hating school. Then he started to quit everything that he cared about. He was a soccer goalie. He stopped playing soccer and stopped wanting to be with friends. We were offered tons of parenting advice. Oh, you're too strict, you're not strict enough, you should use sticker charts, try bribery. We tried everything. And as his fears intensified, I became alarmed and I sought counsel from the school psychologist. I had no idea what to do. All I knew is, as a parent, I was supposed to know how to control his behavior, and I couldn't. After meeting with the school psychologist, she observed my son and then came back and told me that I needed to seek treatment for my anxiety, but my son was perfectly fine. He wasn't fine. By the time he was in 3rd grade, he hated everything. He hated school, soccer, he quit art class, didn't want to be with friends. Getting him out of bed to go to school every day felt like walking on a tightrope in a storm. Every day was an argument, a negotiation, a meltdown, and my happy little boy was miserable. It didn't make any sense. What did an 8-year-old have to be unhappy about? Life should be easy and carefree when you're 8. I would meet the school psychologist at the front door every day when I could actually get him in the car. And half the time I couldn't get him out of his bed. There had to be a reason for this, and I couldn't figure it out. According to the school, he was fine, because when he was there, he was perfectly fine when I could get him there. So, of course, they believed it was a home problem and convinced me that it was a home problem. Eventually, without the support of the school district, we had our son privately tested, thinking, well, he must have some kind of learning disability, ADD or something like that. Ultimately, his first diagnosis was generalized anxiety disorder. And he spent months in bi-weekly sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. And one day after school, when he was 9 years old, he laid down on the couch and he stared out the window for what seemed like hours. And I sat down next to him and I touched his face, thinking maybe he was sick, had a fever. And he looked at me with big crocodile tears in his eyes and said, "Mommy, I don't want to be alive anymore." The next 2 years were filled with a multitude of doctor's appointments, therapies, medications. He was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and ultimately bipolar disorder. He gained 50 pounds, but lost all of his friends. He was incredibly fragile, increasingly irritable and angry. He would explode into a violent rage over nothing if I passed him the wrong fork. And those rages could last for hours. He barely left the house or my side. We ran out of options and we ran out of hope. The week before his 12th birthday, we made the decision to send him to a residential treatment center. And to this day, I've never experienced a pain so deep. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. This is a picture of my son a year into his treatment center. And you can see he looks like a very, very different boy than the little boy I showed you earlier. Oops, I've skipped ahead. That's him now, but I'm going to go back. So we were out of options. We were out of hope. And we did not receive flowers or casseroles. We had no help with carpools. Very few people knew what was happening. And even those who did know didn't know how to respond. We were completely isolated alone. Everyone else's family just seemed perfect. So what led our family into this dark corner? And why did we feel so isolated and blinded at the most difficult point in our child's life? Our society is cloaked with fear, blame, shame, and silence around the issue of mental illness, particularly childhood mental illness. And the result is a complete lack of knowledge. There's a lack of knowledge by the general public. I had no idea that a young child could suffer from anxiety, depression, or bipolar disorder for no apparent reason. I just didn't know that could happen. And the teachers didn't know that could happen. There was no trauma, there was no incident, there was no apparent or known family history. We were isolated from the community. We didn't know what we didn't know. It's one of my favorite expressions. You don't know what you don't know. And that lack of knowledge created an isolation. We marginalized ourselves, and many of the people in our community withdrew from us. We were afraid, we blamed ourselves, we were ashamed of our son's erratic behavior, and even more ashamed that we couldn't help him. So we retreated into silence. Because of the fear and the blame and the shame and the silence, we completely lacked any understanding or knowledge that children could struggle with mental health issues. The only knowledge we had was from TV and movies. And those children portrayed, or people, were either evil or had experienced some traumatizing event that caused their emotional state to deteriorate. There was always some cause. But again, you don't know what you don't know. Hindsight is 20/20, and while it's now clear to me that Tim struggled for years with symptoms of anxiety, we had no idea that his behavior could be related to his mental health. As far as I knew, a child's behavior is the direct result of parenting. We've all been there, right? So imagine you're at the grocery store. I don't know how many times I've seen this happen, and there's a young child having a complete tantrum because he wants a lollipop or a piece of candy, and the mother doesn't want to give it to him. And they're screaming, and we're standing looking at this event, thinking to ourselves, oh, that mother. No matter what that mom does, it's going to be wrong. So if she gives in and gives them the candy or the lollipop, we think to ourselves, oh, I would never let my child control me that way. I would never have given in to that child. That child's spoiled. That's why he's crying. That's why he's having a fit. If she doesn't give in, or if she reprimands him, we think, God, why can't that mom just give him the lollipop? I mean, please. We always make a judgment about parents when we see a child behaving in a way that's not appropriate or that doesn't seem to fit the norm. So without even the most basic and fundamental knowledge of mental illness, and given that society makes those automatic judgments towards parents, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know who to turn to for help. We didn't know how to find help. This is not exactly playgroup or soccer field conversation. You can find out from your friends what allergists they use or what orthopedist they use when their son broke their leg. But you don't exactly sit around talking about your child's erratic behavior and mood disorders on the soccer field or in playgroups. In fact, I never recall in my years of raising children ever having casual conversations with other parents about my child's emotional state whatsoever. So what I know now is that that lack of knowledge caused years of delays in finding adequate treatment. I wanted to get back because, of course, there is a good story here. I want to show you how my son is doing now. This is my son now. He's 20 years old, and we were very, very lucky. And I'm going to get back to how lucky we are, but I did want to let everybody know that right now he's doing very well, and we're very, very proud of him. So without knowing anything about anxiety disorders in children, we hoped his fear, like going back to his fear of the bus and his fear of school, was just a phase of childhood, or that we ultimately could change his behavior if we just were better parents. And as he spent more and more time in the nurse's office with headaches and stomach aches, we spent more and more time in doctor's offices trying to get treatment for allergies, lactose intolerance, hypoglycemia, ulcers. We didn't know that physical health and mental health are inextricably linked. During those early years, not one person suggested we consider taking our son to see a mental health professional. And when we finally did seek help privately, it was because we thought his hatred of school was the result of a learning disability. I had tons of friends whose kids had ADHD. We were shocked by his diagnosis of anxiety and depression, and even more frightened when his diagnosis was bipolar disorder. It never occurred to us that our child could have a mental health diagnosis. And when he was given those diagnoses, we were given very little information and sought out second opinions. And the other doctors we met with would disagree with the first doctors. Oh no, children can't have bipolar disorder, one doctor said. Your son is just very, very complicated, we were told. Years of conflicting opinions and counseling only extended our confusion and fear that we would never find help or that things would never get better. We were the lucky ones. It only took us 7 years for our son. And we had resources. We were incredibly lucky. It takes an average of 10 years from the onset of symptoms of mental illness to get proper diagnosis and effective treatment. 10 years. 10 years in the life of a child. 10 years of missing birthday parties, of being unable to attend school regularly. 10 years lost during the most formative years of a child. And these delays, in my opinion, are caused by our culture of fear, shame, blame, and silence, which keep parents, teachers, and even medical professionals in the dark when it comes to having sufficient knowledge and understanding of children's mental health conditions. So on that day I was describing in bed 5 days after my surgery for a mastectomy, I looked over at the beautiful flowers and I tried to write thank you notes, and I thought about how much has changed in my lifetime when it comes to cancer. I remember when cancer was the C word, not to put an age on me, but I'm old enough to remember that. It was never talked about in public. Just a few decades ago, as recently as the early 80s, cancer was still under a cloak of blame, shame, and silence. And women died as a result of the fear of getting diagnosed with breast cancer. And there was a campaign of speaking out and increasing knowledge, and that campaign changed everything. And now I am one of the lucky ones who's a breast cancer survivor, because no one is ashamed to go to the doctor to get checked. No one is worried about being diagnosed with breast cancer. I say breast cancer all the time and nobody cares. Oh yeah, my mom had breast cancer too. Pink ribbons are everywhere. The football players are wearing pink ribbons. So I decided, why can't we follow in those footsteps of those people who made pink ribbons a household item and a public symbol for responsible community health care? And I want to just give you some information that you may not know. At this time in our country, there are more than 2.8 million breast cancer survivors. And that number includes women who are in treatment and those women who have completed treatment and are considered survivors. 2.8 million. Today's data indicates that mental illness impacts the lives of 20 times as many people as breast cancer. But since 1989, the death rates for breast cancer have been dropping. Data shows the awareness campaign has led to early detections and better outcomes. That is a sign of hope and bodes well for us being able to bring resources effectively to the issue of mental health. Just as we've made huge strides with breast cancer, if we can do this for breast cancer, I know we can do this for mental health care. But change doesn't happen on its own. Historically, it always takes work and mobilization to create lasting change. So where are we today when it comes to public knowledge and understanding mental health? Those of you who are listening, I'm guessing, know a lot about mental health, and so I'm speaking in some ways to the choir. But I promise you that the general public doesn't know what we know. They don't know that 1 in 5 youths in our country are diagnosed with or have a diagnosable mental illness, and that 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin to emerge before the age of 14 years old. 75% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by the age of 24. And I don't need to read to you that suicide is the second leading cause of death among children as young as 10 years old. Mental health problems are more common than heart disease, lung disease, and cancer combined. There is such an extreme disparity between how our society deals with mental health and how it deals with other health conditions. Imagine what it would look like if we treated mental health conditions the same way that we treated other health conditions. This is what I was talking before about our culture of silence, how fear, blame, and shame leads to isolation, misunderstanding, lack of support, resistance to seeking treatment, and delays in treatment. I guess I was a little behind in my slides. This is my first time doing slides and talking. You see, I can just talk. I don't even need the slides. I could just say it off the top of my head. Anyway, this is what I was talking about. Think about other past public health campaigns, breast cancer, AIDS, tobacco use. We started educating the public about these various issues, and things have changed. And we have such common early intervention and prevention models that we've learned in our society as our society has developed, like washing hands and eating healthy and taking vitamins and getting sunshine but wearing sunscreen. I mean, these are all things that we have learned through time as a society, but we had to learn it with education and knowledge. And we know that public health literacy programs and campaigns lead to early intervention and can change the trajectory of an illness. So what would it look like if we brought the same knowledge and care and best practices to our children's mental health as we do to their physical health? Let's see here. That seems like a simple solution, right? The reality is it's really difficult to make that happen, because for every family contending with a mental health challenge, accessing the solution is extremely difficult. And I believe it's because of the cycle of fear, blame, shame, and silence that we live in our society. And of course, the many intertwined structural issues that come along with that. Few families have access to help. As I said before, our family was incredibly lucky. We had the education and finances and strong social network that put us in a fortunate position that we were able to meet the challenge with resources that many people don't have. We could access the best that society had to offer, and yet we were still paralyzed. with confusing and inadequate knowledge, resources, and support. If we couldn't meet the problem, how could we possibly lay the burden on those with less access to resources? How are people who don't have resources able to rise to this challenge? I want to tell you a little bit more about myself in addition to dealing with the heartbreak of a child who has mental health condition and my breast cancer. I did decide about 7 years ago to get more active and involved in the community. And I started a community support group with a friend of mine to support other parents who are in the same situation that I was in. There was no support group anywhere that I could find in Westchester County. So we started our own. And in the past 7 years, over 800 families have come to that support group. It just goes to show the incredible need that is out there. I have, since that time, coached and spoken with thousands of families. I've created a nonprofit called the Youth Mental Health Project. I've joined the board of the International Bipolar Foundation. And through my years of experience supporting parents and with nonprofits and traveling with my film, which I'll get to in a little bit, I see distinct patterns and gaps in the system, and there's no question that we can do something about this together. But we have to create community conversations. And if we can get people talking and get rid of our culture of silence and encourage public health literacy programs, which would then increase everybody's knowledge about the early warning signs and symptoms of mental health conditions, and perhaps even just understanding the basics of what mental health is, we could decrease the fear and the stigma, and that would lead to timely access to treatment and support. So how do we do that? How do we change the culture of silence? We have to change the narrative. We know that storytelling, honest storytelling, can have an impact on stigma. My attempt to change the narrative brought me to a very unusual product. About 3 years ago, I was in the right place at the right time with a producer and filmmaker who wanted to make a film. And I told him I had a story for them. So somehow, and I still pinch myself, I'm not exactly sure how it happened, I sat down and wrote the screenplay with the help of the director. And we created the film No Letting Go. What was really, really important to me in doing that was that I not only produced a film that depicted my experience, but that depicted the experience of many, many families that I had encountered in my work in mental health. I knew this story, and I knew it was muted in our society to the detriment of us being able to change the narrative. You can read all sorts of scientific research and white papers, but those don't reach your general family, your general parent or child who's suffering. But with one scene of a film, we can really get a message across. Parents have responded with relief and trust because the film is telling a complex and challenging story that's relatable. Our hope is that the real life story allows people to know that they are not alone and that there is hope. The other hope is that because it's a relatable story about a family, my hope is that you could take the diagnoses that are portrayed in the movie, anxiety, depression, and ultimately bipolar disorder, and put in any other chronic health condition, and you can relate to the film. Anytime your child is in pain and struggles with a chronic, life-threatening condition, it really doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. It's just that when it's a mental health diagnosis, an invisible illness, there is so much more silence and fear around it. What I really wanted to do with the film is use it to spark conversations. So we were very lucky. The film has been well received. It's won a lot of awards, and I've been able to take it on the road in communities all over the place. That's the most important thing to me, that we get into communities and we provide information and knowledge and resources. We need to start by having conversations, because without conversations, families are prevented from helping each other, and effectively supporting our children is impossible. I actually started the Youth Mental Health Project. This is a great quote, which I won't read to you. I'll just put it up there and you can read it on your own. But I started the Youth Mental Health Project as a platform to create awareness, education, and support. And our hope is that with the Youth Mental Health Project, we can take the film into communities and have community conversations. We've been very, very lucky so far. We have been in 13 states and have probably had about a dozen screenings in Connecticut alone. It seems to spread like wildfire a little bit once it's on in one place. But there's so much more to having community conversations than just watching a film, and not that I mean just watching the film. The film is a great tool, I believe, and it seems to be a way that people can come together in a community in a non-threatening way, rather than sitting and listening to a bunch of panelists or a lecture from a psychologist. It's a non-threatening way to get into a group of people together, to different stakeholders in youth to come together and see what it's really like for us, for parents who are trying their best to raise a child with a mental health issue, and discuss in each community what is available, what are the resources in that community, and what is happening in any given community, because it's very different in each community, is incredibly different. Even in Westchester alone, the town, from town to town, each community handles it very differently. This is, I love this picture because it really describes what I believe, which is that mental health and physical health are both essential. And one of the things we don't seem to understand, and that people don't understand, is that mental health, like physical health, exists on a continuum. There's a perception that there are people who are mentally ill, and then there's everybody else who's healthy. And we know that's not true. It's not any more true than people are physically healthy or they're physically ill. Sometimes there's a lot of in between. And as humans, we move in and out of that spectrum throughout our lives. Someone can have a mental health condition but not necessarily be ill. My son, for instance, right now, he still suffers from bipolar disorder, but he's not ill. He's been stable for 5 years. He manages his condition. He's very, very aware. I would have to say he has more self-awareness in his pinky than most people I know. So he's an example of someone who has a mental health condition who's managing it. And if someone had asthma or diabetes but was doing well and managing their condition, we wouldn't consider them ill. We would consider that they had a condition that they were managing. So these are some basic concepts and ideas that we at the Youth Mental Health Project and International Bipolar Foundation as well are trying to explain to the world, to get the message out that mental health and physical health are intrinsically linked and both vitally important. And my particular focus is on children, because I truly believe that if we could get to children earlier, that we could change the incidence and severity of mental illness. I look back and I can tell you that my son showed signs when he was 2, 3, 4 years old. But like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't know anything about it, then how on earth can you seek help? You can't get help for a problem that you don't know can even exist. So this is my vision for the future, that in every community we'll have mental health literacy programs, and that we will have social and emotional learning skills built into our curriculum for kids at very early ages. I believe, and even in kindergarten, we need to teach our kids that teach our kids how to handle their emotions. My executive director, Wendy Ward, is brilliant and says all the time, kids are born with their emotions. And as parents, we are not given information about what to do about our children's emotions. In fact, we live in a society where we think we have to control our kids. But they are born with their own unique individual emotions, and we can help guide them, I certainly hope so, and coach them. But if we ignore the fact that they have emotions and we are never taught how to deal with that, then we're not giving them the skills they need for resiliency and empathy and the skills they need to cope with the difficulties that come along in life. So that's my personal opinion. I can only imagine what kind of questions might be popping up, but I just want to say that although 1 in 5 children have a diagnosable mental health condition, 5 in 5 children have mental health. Every child has mental health. It's just where on the continuum are they? And when can we get to them and give them skills that they need before it turns into something so serious that causes a parent to have to send their child away for treatment for 2 years, 3 years? Some parents aren't as lucky as I am. And some parents have their children taken away because they can't help them. And that's just a crime. We would never put up with that if it was any other disease. So that is near the end of, I could talk forever, as you probably noticed, but I do want to make sure that we have time to answer some questions. So Debbie, while you're looking through the questions, I just want to answer a couple questions that I always get. The first is, how did my kids feel about me making a movie about their story? And it's a very fair and valid question, and I just want to answer that, even though I don't know if anyone's asked. And that is, I would never, ever have done this or engaged in this project without my children's support. My children have been incredibly amazing. And when I went to them with this concept and asked what they felt about my involvement, they said, "Mom, you have to tell this story. This is an important story, and we can help people." And they were very, very enthusiastic. They all got to see the screenplay before at various times to help me, and they all had input. My middle son, the one who has bipolar disorder, turned to my younger son, who is an actor, and said, "Noah, you have to play that part. You're the only one who understands and who can do it." I don't know if that's true, but my youngest son did play the part of Timothy in the movie, which is the part of the middle son who struggles with a mental illness. And my oldest son has also become a mental health advocate. He's working with me at the Youth Mental Health Project and has done an amazing TEDx talk, which you can find on YouTube if you Google Max Silverman Bates College. He did a great TEDx talk about the struggles of being a sibling. But they're all mental health advocates in their own right. Eli sometimes goes with me to talk, as you saw in that picture of him. I don't know how to get back easily, so I guess that's probably not a good idea. Sorry. He does speak with me, so they're all really on board and are very proud to be involved in this movement. I decided very early on, once I figured out what was going on, that I didn't want my children to live in a world where they were ashamed of themselves or of their sibling or of us as a family. And so I began, as soon as I could, treating it like I would treat any other illness. And I was very matter of fact. And I taught my children about it. And I told them the truth about what was going on. And I kind of normalized it in our house, sort of, okay, he has bipolar disorder. Some people have asthma. Some people have diabetes. Some people get cancer. This is his struggle, and we have to help him. And we have to support him when he's not doing well. So we've been very lucky that that has been that has been the way it has been for our family. And I know it's really difficult for other families. It's not always possible to put your story out there. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that everyone should go out there and tell their story. It's just not possible for some people, depending on where they live, because there is still so much discrimination and stereotyping and labeling. And we haven't come far enough for that. But what I will say is that that's why I'm doing it, because I can. Because my family is on board and my family is okay with it. And that makes all the difference. And so I guess I'll end there. Debbie, are you on? Are there questions that have come up?
Yes, Randi, thank you. Thank you again for all of your personal insight. It's very much appreciated, and I've had numerous comments telling me so. I won't go through each of them, but I will summarize in saying that. The first question that I see here is, how did you start the community support groups?
Oh, that's a great question. In fact, as part of the Youth Mental Health Project, one of the things we're doing is we're creating guides for parents to create their own support groups, and including all sorts of great educational materials and tools that local community groups can use to start a support group. So I can give more details if anyone wants to send me an email, which I don't know if I put my email address anywhere. But my email address is Randi, Randi.Silverman @ymhproject.org. That's Y as in youth, M as in mental, H as in health, project.org. But generally, I would say what we did really is we just created a flyer and we put it up and we sent it to anybody we knew. We sent it to all the local school districts, to the special education committees, to the psychologists, to the local mental health groups. And we basically just said, we are parents wanting to create a parent support group for those who are raising children with anxiety, depression, or mood disorders. And we picked a time and a date, and we told them we'd give them the address on RSVP, and we got lots of offers of different community places that we could hold the support group, but we decided that we would hold it out of our homes. And the very first support group, 40 parents showed up. 40 parents I'd never met before showed up. And ever since then, we probably have about a dozen people come to each support group, about half of whom are new each time, and the other half who are repeating. And it's really just spread at this point by word of mouth. But I can give anybody who wants more details on how to accomplish that more information if they want to email me directly. Debbie?
Great. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see. The response from the gal that just asked that question about the support group said that she's starting one in January and she could use the tools. So hopefully you did hear Randi's email, or if not, you can also email me, dbrown@ibpf.org, and I will forward to Randi for sure. Let's see, the next question is, my son is 10 and has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. We live in a small town of about 4,000 people, and when I've shared some of his struggles, well-meaning people make comments such as, well, he seemed fine at football, or the other day, or, but he is so smart. And sometimes it's easier for me not to share at all because it leaves me feeling frustrated and vulnerable.
So is there, I'm guessing the question.
Not really a question, but that's how she feels. And then there's a follow-up
Yeah.
that I think that offering youth with mental health struggle mentors like your son is a great idea. Maybe
It is a great idea. Actually, yeah, it is a great idea. And we're trying to create a youth advisory council to put something like that together. It's hard, though, because my son, who's 20, does actually act as mentor to some of the kids in my own support group, because he's old enough and he really relates. And in fact, his job right now is he's a live-in caregiver for a couple of children, a family, because he's just such a caring and nurturing kid. So you're right. There's nothing better than peer support, and peer support includes parent-to-parent support as well as kid-to-kid support. It's very, very hard to find that. Let me just speak to the issue of how difficult it is in a small community when you start to share this information. It's incredibly difficult. So people find that they have one of two choices. One is to isolate and not tell everybody, or only tell a select amount of people. And the other is to be out in the open with it and use it as an opportunity to educate. People make stupid comments, and you have to try to remember that the comments that people make is because the reason they make those comments is because they have grown up in the society we have grown up in, which is to be afraid and to not understand, and they have complete lack of knowledge. So if we want to make a difference, and we're going to come out in terms of acknowledging to the world that we have mental health issues in our family, then we need to be able to take the time to educate. And of course, one way to do that is to have a community screening of the film, but there are a lot of other great ways that you can bring education into your community, and there are a lot of terrific programs. I hope for the mom who asked the question about who had the 10-year-old who was diagnosed, one of the things I found it very, very important to do was to educate the school district. The school personnel, the teachers, even the school psychologists, really had no idea what childhood bipolar was all about. And half the time they didn't believe me. I would tell them stories about what happens at home, and they would just say, well, he's fine when he's here, so it must be what you're doing. And they didn't realize that a child with a mental health condition can behave perfectly fine at school and just hold it all together until he can't take it anymore and comes home and explodes, or throws chairs across the room. So it does take time, and it takes effort, but there's a lot of great information. International Bipolar Foundation, for instance, when you go on our website, there are a lot of great educational materials. We're developing educational materials at the Youth Mental Health Project specifically for youth and children, not necessarily about bipolar disorder, but in general. And it takes time, but I would encourage those of you who have the energy and the ability to, as you learn, share your information and explain, no, this is actually a medical condition of the brain, and this is what we're doing, and this is what we've learned, and share information. You can find a lot of information also on the National Institute for Mental Health or NAMI. Actually, IBPF has a great resources tab, right, Debbie? That there are lots of different resources. So don't be afraid to use the moment to educate other people around you. You'll find then they'll start talking, and they'll say, oh, my uncle, my cousin, my neighbor. I mean, you'll be amazed once you open up how many more people will open up around you. That's what I found happen. The handful of people that didn't understand and didn't want anything to do with us, frankly, I didn't have the energy to be their friend anyway. So I ended up finding a lot of new friends, and really pared down about being with people that couldn't understand, because it's hard. It's really hard to raise a child with who has bipolar disorder, and it takes a lot of energy. And so you have to conserve that energy and try really hard to recognize that there are well-meaning people out there who just simply don't get it. So No, I'm sorry, Debbie, go ahead. Do you have another question?
Yeah, yes. Thank you for that answer. You do need to surround yourself with supportive people, and this leads into the next question. It was you answered the question previously, but this particular mom is looking for a way to explain to a group of people. So her son had a meltdown during a basketball game. So she feels like today she needs to follow up. This was yesterday, and explain to this group of people. Is there a way, or should it be one-on-one? Can you help her with that?
Well, it's a tough thing. I'm assuming that perhaps she's spoken with the coach. I think that's the first. Whoever's on the coaching team and staff needs to have some kind of understanding. I'm assuming that her child has a mood disorder or a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And I think if you're ready to come out and say, listen, my son is struggling with a mental health condition, and we are doing the best that we can right now to help him. It's tricky, it's difficult, and he's going through a hard time. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but at the same time, we want you to know that sometimes when he's not well, it's hard for him to control his emotions and his disappointments and his moods. But we're working on it, and because you want them to know that you're on top of it, you understand what's going on, you are trying to get him treatment, because you don't want them to be afraid of that everything he does, he's going to explode. We don't want to create more fear. But that if he had asthma and had an asthma attack in the middle of the game and couldn't breathe, nobody would yell at him and say, just breathe better. So if the people could try to understand that there are times where his behavior is something that he is not able to control at this time, but that it is something that you're all desperately working on. And maybe you could meet with the group and come up with some kind of plan for an understanding, because maybe there are games that he just isn't well enough to attend, or maybe there are times when that's not a good day for him to go to basketball. And if they'll understand that a little bit, that might be helpful. In my film, there's a scene where the main character who has bipolar is the soccer goalie, and he misses a save, and the kids start yelling at him, and he flips out and runs off of the field in the middle of a soccer game. That actually happened in my real life, where he literally had a breakdown and ran off the soccer field. And my husband was the coach, and it was mortifying. It was mortifying for him. He never played soccer again after that because he was too embarrassed. So for your son's sake, I would limit his exposure to situations that could cause him to break down, because he doesn't want to be that person in front of his friends and his teammates. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I would suggest.
Great, thank you for that answer. The next question is, how do you manage your children and your son with bipolar? Sometimes I feel that I neglect my two other kids. Do you have tips?
Oh, that is such a huge problem with the siblings. I had an older son and a younger son, and unfortunately, the neediest person in the house gets the most attention, and it's unfortunate. But that does happen, and I would say, first of all, don't beat yourself up too much. If your child who had bipolar had cancer, then what would you do? Your other kids would not get as much care and attention. That's the way it is. That's why we need community support. That's why we need friends to help us. That's why we need to reach out to people and let them know, look, I'm really struggling. I could use your help because I don't even know how I'm going to find time to make dinner. Because I can't leave the three kids alone. So it is really hard, and I would do the best you can to educate your other children, and because they will go through periods of hatred and resentment and anger, and rightly so. But the more you educate them on what's happening, and that it's not your child with bipolar's fault, and that this is a brain disorder, and his brain doesn't work the way that it should right now, but we have to help him and we have to support him or her. Eventually they come around. Eventually the other kids come around to understanding. It's not overnight, but you try to explain as much as you can. That can be helpful. And sometimes we in our family had to separate a lot. So my husband would go off with the two kids and I would stay with one, or he would stay with one and I would take the other out to lunch. I mean, you have to do that. It's exhausting, but sometimes you have to take the time to do that if you can. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. Another question is for the kid-to-kid mentoring program that you were talking about. Are they using texting or phone, or is it always in person?
No, I mean, I don't know of somebody suggested in the questions that there should be a mentoring program. There isn't one that I know of, but I do think it's a great idea. And what I was saying is that my son has done mentoring of other kids in person, actually, because they're local neighborhood kids. There are some, Debbie, and maybe you know, I mean, there are some good online forums, especially for teens, that teens can go onto to talk to each other online. There probably is an app, although I can't tell you what that is. But I know, and I can't remember, Debbie, do you know what I'm talking about? I think it's, I don't know. I could look it up and find it and get back to people, but I'm not sure.
I think this person was inquiring about just how it worked, not necessarily using it, but I can...
Well, I mean, the idea is that you have an older kid who's been through, so my son is 20, but when he was 9, he was going through the same thing that a lot of other children are going through. So he spent time with 2 different kids. You know, basically, it wasn't babysitting. He would do art with them. He would take walks with them. Kind of like babysitting, but it was with a kid who got them. It's not therapy. It's just your basic peer support, which I think really we do need more of that for children. It's starting to become a big thing. Peer support for adults is a huge thing and very needed. But I don't know that anyone's figured out how to create a program of that for children. I think it's necessary, so it's something I've got to look into, as a matter of fact.
Okay, great. This person is actually from an organization that is trying to develop, so that's why they're asking, you know, these particular questions. So that's helpful. The next question is, could you talk about how this has impacted your marriage?
Well, unfortunately, my husband and I are divorced. We separated about, I guess it was 4 years ago. We were married for 20 years, and it was really difficult. It's difficult to be married and raise neurotypical kids, and it's especially difficult in these scenarios. And what I've seen, not just with my family, but with many, many other families, is that for whatever reason, men and women, and I don't mean to be sexist here, but men and women come about things differently. Their timing's different, the way they see things is different, and they might get to the same place ultimately, but they get there in a different way. And that can be really, really difficult on a marriage. And I think it's important, I try to advise the parents in my support group to remember that this is a grieving process. No one holds their newborn baby in their arms and dreams of the day when they have a mental health disorder. I mean, it's just not even part of our concept. And so you're grieving at whatever point that is through the process, while at the same time you're trying to understand and you're fighting the stigma and you're trying to get your child educated and you're trying to get treatment and deal with medications. It's a lot. So I recommend to all parents who are married to really make sure they take the time to go through it together, meaning recognize you're not going to grieve the same way, but share your grieving. So I found out a couple years after my divorce that my husband, who at the time just started becoming even more of a workaholic than he was before, and it was like we were in two separate worlds. This was when my son went to residential treatment. I just found out a couple years ago that he would cry on his way to work, and I never knew that. He didn't share that with me, and I didn't share with him how I was feeling. We were both trying to be strong, and therefore we weren't there for each other. But I do have to say that my marriage dissolved for a lot of reasons, and it wasn't just because I was parenting a child with bipolar disorder. There were plenty of other reasons that our marriage didn't work out. So, and I know plenty of families who do stay together, but it's difficult. It's really difficult. Just remember to try to remember that you're a team and you've got to go through it together as much as possible. And I highly recommend family therapy and couples therapy with regard to trying to find a way to be on the same page about how you're parenting, because that's usually what the argument is about. Debbie?
Yes, great. Thank you for sharing that personal information. Very much appreciated and helpful. It is time to wrap up, and I want to again thank you, Randi. This has been invaluable, and if there is a question that possibly you think of, as an afterthought and want an answer from Randi, again, please feel free to email me at dbrown@ibpf.org, and I will be sure to share this with Randi, and she can get back to you.
Thank you. I should have put my email on a slide, I guess, but again, it's randi.silverman@ymhproject.org, but Debbie knows how to get in touch with me, and I just want to let everybody know the International Bipolar Foundation provides a lot of amazing programs and services and supports. And so it's a nonprofit 501c3 corporation, and they could use your support. So think about the International Bipolar Foundation if you haven't already when it comes time for charitable giving.
Thank you very much, Randi, and everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.